Hello and welcome to my September reading wrap up. This month I decided to make my reading a Man Booker special. Similarly to my previous award themed reading months, I picked a few books from the past Man Booker winners. Unfortunately, I didn't really enjoy any of the Man Booker winning books that I read this month, and the most annoying thing about that was that I could see they were good books and that they were very well written and very skillfully crafted, but I just wasn't very interested in them myself. And I don't know whether this is due to the time that I'm reading them. Maybe if I'd read these books a few years earlier, I might have enjoyed them more, but my main takeaway from the 4 books that I've read is that I'd seen everything that they were saying somewhere else before. So towards the end of September, I was very disheartened with my reading and thought I may as well start on my Halloween reads early for October. But then this book arrived in the library, completely newly ordered, and I was luckily enough to be the first person to request it, and so I read this in the last week of September and enjoyed it immensely. So thankfully September was not a complete dead loss. The first book I read was Amsterdam by Ian McEwan. If you can recall, a few wrap-ups ago I read Chesil Beach and absolutely loved it, so I was very excited to read the rest of Ian McEwan's books. And I found this in an op shop and it's super skinny, so I thought I'd probably enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the very short On Chesil Beach. However, unfortunately not. This is about 2 men called Clive and Vernon. The story starts off with them at the funeral of their mutual friend Molly. They both kind of had relationships with her in the past, and they both equally hate her current husband. Clive is a composer and he has been tasked to compose a tune for the millennium, because this is set in sometime in the 90s. It won the Man Book obviously in 98, and so Clive is writing a song for the UK for the year 2000. And Vernon is the editor of a newspaper. So there's another character on the scene. He is a member of Parliament and he also had a relationship with Molly. Molly's husband digs up photos of this politician dressed up in women's clothing, photos that were taken by Molly, and so then there's this whole scandal involving Vernon as to whether he should publish these photos in his newspaper, which Clive doesn't agree with. It's definitely not very plot heavy, which is fine, but I just couldn't care about the characters. In fact, I found them quite confusing in that it didn't feel like there was enough to distinguish between the 2 of them for me to remember which one was which. It kind of reminded me of a slightly soapy BBC drama, and I feel like it would almost work better as a drama because you could get 2 really good actors who could really bring to life these kind of bland characters and make them a bit more interesting, maybe make them more sympathetic than I felt that they were in the book. Probably the bits I enjoyed the most was seeing the workings of a newspaper back in 98, because I myself work at a newspaper, and obviously there is a whole thing now around how print is dying and everything is on the internet, so it's very hard to make money in the newspaper business. However, back in 98 they also felt this way as well, which is kind of nice to see that although this is 20 years ago, the problems that were seen as current then are still sort of current problems now. So maybe print media will still be alive in 20 years from now as well. The ending was ridiculous and so over the top compared to the rest of the book that I actually really liked it, so at least I ended this on a high note. Next I read The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I love this author's writing. I adore Never Let Me Go, and I've also read another of his books, which I have on my shelf. And I also have When We Were Orphans, which I also really enjoyed. So I was expecting to really enjoy this. I've also seen the film, and maybe that was the problem in why I didn't like this, because I think Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins did a much better job of portraying these characters than this book did. So this is about a butler of a very old English manor home. It starts off in the 50s with him about to go on a trip. The family that previously owned the house no longer lived there, and I think the guy who used to run it died, so it's now owned by an American who's really into like old British stuff. And so you slowly learn more about the past of the house and the history of the butler and his relationship with the housekeeper through sort of flashbacks and him reminiscing. It's told in first person from his perspective, so you have to read between the lines a lot to work out what's really going on, because he is so stuffy and British and completely suppressed every feeling he's ever had. If I didn't know already from the film, it would take a long time to realize that he and the housekeeper had romantic feelings for each other. Obviously Emma Thompson is the queen of suppressed emotions. If you've seen Sense and Sensibility, her as Eleanor, it's quite a similar character to that in a way. And Anthony Hopkins as well is also a great actor, and he did an amazing job of, on the surface, keeping that complete stiff upper lip, but in his eyes you could see the emotion going on inside of him. I felt in this book that you had to read too much between the lines, and there was too much verbose, just random talking about rules and the way proper things are done and random butler stuff that just wasn't actually that interesting to me. I actually also have this book by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's even one of those signed books because my dad got it for me, and I think it was one of those you could order a signed book from Book Depository or something. And I couldn't get into this one at all either. I found it really tedious. So it looks like it's kind of a mixed bag with that author, which is a shame because I thought he was one of my favorites. I still have some of his books to read though, so we will see whether I enjoy the other ones. Oh, actually. I just keep forgetting that I have so many of his books. I actually have his collection of short stories, so I might give that a try soon and see if I like this one. So the next book I didn't finish. It's The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I only got, I think, about 20 pages in, and I decided this was not for me. I sort of decided from the first page that I wasn't going to like this book, because generally any book that feels the need to unnecessarily mention a penis is not something that I'm going to enjoy. Because I like to go into books not really knowing a lot about them, I didn't realize that this book is sort of famed for being not particularly linear in its writing. I think the enjoyment that people get from this book is the atmosphere and the way it is written, but for me that is not something that I enjoy over there being strong characters. And these characters I couldn't get a grasp on at all. I had no idea who they were. Yeah, it was just really hard to get into. It just seemed to be rambling. So that's a shame because I wanted to read Michael Ondaatje's Wallite, but now I'm kind of a bit hesitant to pick it up unless maybe the writing style is very different from this one. I might try watching the film adaptation of this book, which I also know is very famous in the film world, so maybe that's a way I can consume this story. Next, I read Offshore by Penelope Fitzgerald. Again, I think in the same month that I read On Chesil Beach, I read The Bookshop by this author. I absolutely love that book, and unfortunately I didn't like this one. There is a pattern here. I definitely enjoyed this one more in terms of the writing compared to The Remains of the Day and Amsterdam. So this book is about a group of people in the 60s who all live on houseboats on the River Thames. And so I found the setting really interesting. I've never read a book about a bunch of people living on houseboats. The people who live on these boats are all quite eccentric in their own way, and Penelope Fitzgerald is immensely skillful at crafting these very unusual and interesting characters. However, I felt that the balance between the unusual setting and the unusual characters was not quite right. This book had no in for the audience. You couldn't relate to the characters living on houseboats unless you yourself were one of the very rare people who do live on a houseboat. So you couldn't relate to the setting, but you couldn't also relate to the characters either because they were all quite strange. The main problem I found was that there were too many characters getting points of views. For just one person's perspective would have made the book a bit more consistent and easy to read, I think. The ending though was horrendous. It wasn't even like an open ending. It just ended with no reason whatsoever for it to end at that particular moment. And there was so much of the story still left to tell. I think I will try some of Penelope Fitzgerald's other books, maybe not right away. I still have hope because I did love The Bookshop so much, and I do think her writing and what she writes about is so interesting and different. So that was all I'd planned to read for my Man Booker month. But then a book came in from the library that is nominated for this year's Man Booker prize, and that is From a Low and Quiet Sea by Donal Ryan. This book is almost like 3 short stories that all link together at the end. This book, again, I could see it was well crafted and well written, but I just wasn't getting anything new from it. I felt like I'd seen all these stories before. I guess it just didn't pique my interest in any particular way. I did like how it was all wrapped up at the end, actually. I thought that was quite clever, and I guess I wasn't expecting it either, so it was nice to see that what felt like very random stories at the beginning did actually come together in a kind of meaningful way at the end. Thankfully, this book that I read in the last week of September, I absolutely loved. So this is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is about an unnamed narrator, which every time I remember that she's unnamed, it just annoys me, because while I'm reading the book, it's fine because you're in her head, it's a first-person narration, but then when I think about her as a character, I don't have a name to give her, and it really annoys me. Anyway, at the beginning of the book, we learn that this character has decided that she is going to try and sleep a whole year away and hope that this act will dispel all her problems and all her mental illness and insecurities that she has. She's very fortunate in a way that her parents are both dead, and so she gets rent money from their house as well as a very wealthy inheritance that will keep her going throughout this year in terms of money. She's also lucky in that she manages to find an absolutely insane psychologist who will provide her with all these sleeping pills. She also has a friend called Reva, who she finds intensely annoying, but the character of Reva is really interesting in that she works as a way for us to see all the bad parts about the character, because her reaction to Reva, who although is an annoying character in a way, she's not as annoying as this character seems to think she is, and so I felt that was quite a clever device for us to really see all aspects of the character, even though she's the one telling us about herself. I thought this was a really fascinating concept, and I kind of related to the idea of wanting to sleep not a year away, but just have a really good sleep and feel like you could ignore the outside world for a little while. It's sort of that idea of a lot can happen in a year, and it doesn't feel like a lot's happening when you have to live your everyday routine. It feels like it's just the same old thing. But then when you do look back to how you were the year before and look at how many things have changed, it can actually be quite a lot. And so I guess this idea of sleeping the year away was a way for this character to fast track that, so she didn't actually have to be mentally present throughout all those changes. I also am not the best sleeper in that it takes me at least an hour to fall asleep. My brain just refuses to shut down, and then when I wake up in the morning, which at the moment is around 6 a.m. and I don't have to get up to go to work until 7:30, my brain is instantly awake and refuses to go back to sleep a lot of the time. So the idea of just sleeping was immensely appealing to read about, so I'd highly recommend this one. I definitely think this is going to be one of my favorites of the year. So that was everything I read in September. Please let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned and your opinions on them, and I will see you soon. Bye!